So many people tell me that they want to visit the land of the Bible. They want to walk where Jesus walked. But what if you could pray where Jesus prayed? What if you could have sat and prayed next to him when he prayed, overlooking the Sea of Galilee or in the Garden of Gethsemane? Today we're studying Luke 22, verses 39 through 46, and we'll watch Jesus pray. Welcome to the Shalom Y'all Ministries podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel McCabe. Adam won't be joining us today because of a time conflict, so I'm riding solo, but thanks for joining us. And here at Shalom Y'all Ministries, we always like to emphasize that we believe that a walk through the land deepens your walk with the Lord. And our mission is to teach and encourage those who love the Bible, the land of the Bible, and the people of the land. I'm leading a group to Israel in May, and we invite you to contact us about organizing your own group someday for your school, for your church, for your family. We'd really love to take you. Perhaps you'd like to visit the Church of All Nations that sits at the foot of the Mountain of Olives. Inside the church, there's a rock that tradition says is the rock on which Jesus sat when he prayed the night before his crucifixion. Outside the church is a beautiful garden, which could very well be the site of the Garden of Gethsemane. There are stunning pictures of the eastern gate of the city from the garden. It's not hard to imagine Jesus wanting to rest here with his disciples. It's so beautiful. A little further down the hill from the Mount of Olives, in the Kidron Valley that separates the Mount of Olives from the city of Jerusalem, is another church that marks the location of an ancient olive press. This area looks much like it looked in Jesus' day, and it's conceivable to say that you might be walking where Jesus walked, or even praying, if you so chose, where Jesus prayed. Contact us at shalomyallministries@gmail.com, and we'll schedule a trip. So you can see these amazing sites, and there's so much more to see too, of course. But our address is shalomyallministries@gmail.com. shalomyallministries@gmail.com. I hope you enjoy our trivia segment each episode of the podcast. I certainly enjoy thinking them up. The weather here in Alabama this morning is rainy, but it's really starting to warm up. So I want to piggyback on that theme with my trivia question today. Are you ready? So, what is the hottest temperature in Fahrenheit ever recorded in Israel? What's the hottest temperature in Fahrenheit ever recorded in Israel? Is it 108 degrees, 115, 122, or 129? 108, 115, 122, or 129? Think that one over, and I'll have the answer for you later in the podcast. Over the years, many individuals, couples, and even families have come to me for counseling. I really do enjoy taking the Bible and applying it to the problems and challenges of life. During our initial conversation, I usually like to ask folks what they've done so far about their problem. And as you can imagine, I get all kinds of answers. Sometimes they'll say, "We don't know what to do." And that's an honest answer. Another common answer I get is, "We've prayed about it." Now, for some people, that can mean that they've thrown up a few quick prayers, but they still haven't seen any significant change. Others may have prayed quite a bit, but they too may have seen little or no change. But whether it's a few hasty prayers or 1,000 lengthy, sincere prayers, I've noticed that some people seem almost apologetic about prayer in general. Sometimes the only thing to do about some challenge in your life is to pray because it's the only thing you can do about it at the moment. Every other option may be out of your hands. But I'd really like to convince you that when you've prayed, you've done something great. God sometimes requires us to do more than pray, of course, but at other times, prayer may be all that God requires. John Bunyan, the well-known author of Pilgrim's Progress, put it this way. He said, "You can do more than pray after you have prayed, but you cannot do more than pray until you have prayed." Now, he, of course, meant that prayer should be the first thing we do before considering other options, and he's absolutely right. We can learn so much by watching what Jesus does during a very tough time in his life. And so let's study a short passage. This one is from Luke 22:39 through 46, as I suggested earlier, and we're going to get to watch Jesus pray. Jesus is facing the most difficult day of his life. He will soon be betrayed, beaten, and crucified. He's just spent his last night together with the 12 in the upper room. And so verse 39 begins, Luke 22:39. And coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives as he was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if it's your will, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation." So, what do we learn about prayer from watching Jesus pray the night before he was crucified? Well, the first thing I noticed is that prayer was a habit for him. You can see this really emphasized by Luke in verses 39, 40, and 41. Did you notice that little phrase in verse 39 that I read where it says, as Jesus was accustomed, as he was accustomed? For him, for Jesus, prayer wasn't hit and miss. It was a habit for him to pray rather. And is prayer then a habit for us? Is the important question to really think through, because everyone has habits. We have good ones and bad ones. And here's a good one, to pray consistently, to place ourselves in the presence of the Lord. But here's a suggestion. What if you prayed once a day for 30 days? I bet if you prayed once a day for 30 days, there's a pretty good chance you'll pray once a day for the next 30 years. It becomes a habit pretty quickly. Also, I read the phrase to begin verse 39, coming out. So what that tells me is that Jesus got away from the people and the noise in the big city, and he found a quiet place where people weren't asking him questions or begging for miracles. He separated himself from pressures and responsibilities so that he could talk to his Father. So find a time when you can get away from your spouse and your children, the TV, your phone, the computer. Slow down long enough in your day to pray. It wouldn't be hard to argue that Jesus had more important responsibilities than you do and I do, yet he always found time to pray. He made time to pray. The passage also tells us in verse 40 that, quote, he came to the place, end quote. Apparently, he came to the same place to pray over and over again. Maybe he found one particular olive tree there in the Garden of Gethsemane that he enjoyed sitting beside, or a flat rock that he could stretch out on. But he regularly returned to this place to meet God. And so that really encourages us to do the same, to meet God regularly and wherever you want. You can find some place, any place where you can have a meaningful time with him. It can be your back porch or your bedroom, the living room recliner, your office cubicle over lunch at work, or the side of your baby's crib when he or she is taking a nap. Find your place. And then not only did Jesus get away from all the activity of his ministry to a familiar place, but he went there alone. We see in verse 41, it says that he was withdrawn from them, meaning his disciples, about a stone's throw. He loved the company of disciples, but he didn't always want them around when he prayed. So pray before the kids wake up or after they go to bed. Same with your spouse or parents. Find some you and God time. I hope you men are leading your wives in prayer at least at meals or doing a separate Bible reading time with them, but don't substitute that time for the time you need to be alone with God. And then in the last phrase of verse 41, we read that Jesus knelt down and prayed. It literally says that Jesus prayed by placing the knees. It may be that not only did Jesus go to the same spot to pray on a regular basis, but he placed his knees on that same spot each time. If he were to pass the place where he prayed, there may have been two worn circles in the grass. Man, wouldn't it say something if I went to your bedside and found two worn circles in the carpet or a noticeable spot in the linoleum? Of course, we're not required to pray kneeling down, but if you want a humbling and meaningful experience, you should try it. You can, as I have in the past, you can place a pillow under your knees for comfort if you like, and talk to your king from your knees. Maybe not all the time, but try it. Other gospel writers explain that Jesus prayed at times face down. Many people all over the world still pray face down. Maybe you've seen pictures. It's still very common for folks in the Middle East to pray face down. So whether you kneel or you pray face down or you're just sitting in your seat, your recliner, wherever you're at, it, the most important thing is that your heart is sincere and meaningful in your relationship with the Lord. Um, I wanted to note this, though. There's a famous Bible teacher. His name is William R. Newell. He said that kneeling is a good way to pray because it's uncomfortable. I thought that was sensible. We almost need to be a little uncomfortable. We need to sort of be separated from our circumstances so that we're focusing on the Lord. Daniel prayed on his knees 3 times a day. Jim Elliot, famous in death for being one of the 5 missionaries murdered by the Auca Indians over half a century ago, said, quote, "That saint who advances on his knees never retreats," end quote. And I got to tell you, I'll never forget the scene I personally witnessed in Libre Union, Mexico, many years ago. Our missionary team had arrived at the church there in town to set up for evangelistic movies, and I peeked inside the church that was sponsoring the event. There at the front, by the altar, they didn't see me, but I saw 3 teenage girls kneeling in prayer, their bare knees on the hard concrete floor. It was amazing. I was mesmerized by the scene. I watched them off and on for the next 10, 15 minutes before they came out of the church, but they never moved. They must have been so focused, so captivated in their prayers by the Lord that they couldn't even consider their own comfort the entire time on their knees on the floor. Then there's the phrase in verse 45 that says, when he rose up from prayer. After Jesus prayed, he stood to his feet and almost immediately was taken into custody, beaten, mocked, and crucified. We know the horrible, bittersweet story, but the point being that after prayer, we must face our world. Jesus didn't hide out in the garden to escape the world. He prayed to prepare himself to face the world. So let me offer now a few practical suggestions about your time of prayer. And these have worked for me over the years, but perhaps keep a pad of paper and a pencil or your phone next to you where you pray so that you can write down things that come to mind as you pray. You may suddenly remember that you promised to pick up your friend tomorrow at 3 and you don't want to forget. Just jot it down really quick so that it won't keep distracting you and it's gone. Or just ask the Lord to remind you again when you're done to tend to those matters. And then secondly, don't lay down when you pray. Trust me, I've tried this. It doesn't work. No one has the self-discipline to pray while lying down. So always sit or stand or walk. And then thirdly, I'd recommend that you pray when you are most fresh. Give God your best time. Showers and coffee are for those times maybe when you can barely keep your eyelids open, but prayer is for those times that you are most alert. Give God the best part of your day. Is it morning? Is it noon? Is it night? Whatever time works for you. We've already seen that prayer was a habit for Jesus, and that's pretty clear in those first 3 verses of this passage. But let's also look at verse 40. There's a lesson here as well. Actually, in verses 40 and 46. And the second lesson is this, that prayer keeps you from sinning. Look at what Jesus says in verse 40. He says, when he came to the place, he said to the disciples, pray that you may not enter into temptation. Do you ever have to repeat things to your customers, your employees, your children? Well, look ahead, verse 46. Again, he says to them, why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation. Jesus had to say it twice, that prayer would keep them from sinning. But the disciples weren't catching on to the truth of what he was saying. Let me add, though, a quick side note that the Bible also keeps us from sinning. In a verse that I can remember learning this when I was just a little guy in church. Maybe it was vacation Bible school or Sunday school. I don't remember, but somebody taught me Psalm 119:11, where King David writes, your word have I hidden in my heart that I might not sin against you. So prayer and Bible reading are companions in their power to protect us from our sinful bents. So, thirdly, we see in this battle against sin in our lives that prayer will connect you to your friend, and that's what we often need in moments of temptation. When we are with friends, we find strength. If you found a friend to walk with daily, you'd walk more probably, and you'd probably lose more weight. If you found a friend to be accountable to about your struggle with sin, you'd probably find greater victory over your sin. Prayer connects you to your friend, your capital FRIEND, the Lord, and we find supernatural strength when we pray. Okay, so far we've seen that prayer was a habit for Jesus and that prayer keeps you from sinning. Let me suggest a third principle that we see here in this passage, especially from verse 42. For example, it's okay to pray for tough times to pass. I think that's fine. Jesus does, right? In verse 42, he prays, Father, if it is your will, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. So we can pray for things to be removed in our lives. That's perfectly acceptable. But notice too that Jesus doesn't pray this just to get his way. Now I prayed like that to get my way. In the past, I prayed that God would let me, before I was married, let me date that certain girl or be able to afford a certain car or be able to get over my sickness before Tuesday, things like that. And I don't know that there's anything necessarily wrong with asking for things like that in general. Um, he wants us to pray for things that we desire. It's just when we begin to focus on them in a selfish way to the exclusion of what God wants. I think sometimes he may be pleased with answering prayers like that, but we're wise to remember that he knows more about what we need than we even know ourselves. And then there's the question, have you ever prayed for the wrong thing? Yeah, I have, and I think you have too. I got to tell you this funny story. It's a good story about a man who learned an important lesson about how to pray more focused and more wisely. And it goes like this: a man was being pursued by a roaring, hungry lion. Feeling the lion's hot breath on his neck and knowing his time was short, he prayed as he ran. He cried out in desperation, "Oh Lord, please make this lion a Christian." Within seconds, the frightened man became aware that the lion had stopped the chase. When he looked behind him, he saw the lion kneeling, lips moving in obvious prayer. Who greatly relieved at this turn of events and wanting to join the lion in prayer, he started walking back toward the lion. But when the man got close to him, he heard the lion saying, "And bless, O Lord, this food for which I'm exceedingly grateful." So we need to be conscious to pray wisely and more carefully about the things that matter to us. There are so many other things I see in this passage that we simply don't have the time to look into. For example, we see that God sends comfort and strength when we pray, verse 43. We see that it's important to be persistent in prayer, verse 44. We learn that it is so necessary to support others with our prayers, verses 44 and 45. But I hope, if nothing else, I've encouraged you to pray. It's amazing what there is to learn from watching Jesus pray. Well, let's return to our trivia question before I wrap things up. But what is the hottest temperature in Fahrenheit ever recorded in Israel? I asked. What's the hottest temperature ever recorded in Israel? Is it 108, 115, 122, or 129? What do you think? Well, the answer is D, 129 degrees or 54 degrees Celsius. It took place on June 26, 1942 in Tirat Zvi, which is in the Beit Shean Valley. The temperature I read remained above 122 degrees for 3 days. Now, I'm pretty sure it won't be that hot when we head to Israel in May, but according to weather.com, it's actually going to hit 104 degrees at Tirat Zvi in a few days. So it's definitely hot. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Just to wrap things up, be sure to check us out on Facebook and at our website, shalomyallministries.org. No apostrophe, no spaces, shalomyallministries.org. And of course, let us know if there is a topic that you ever want us to address on the podcast, and we'd be happy to do it. Shalom, y'all.